Hello, today I have a follow-up video. In my last video I was asked to test the YMS Scalper indicator, and at the end of that video I said that I would follow up by showing how I wrote the code. If you haven't seen it, don't worry, I'm going to give you a quick recap here. I was asked to review the YMS Scalper indicator, and I was actually sent a link to download the indicator so that I could run the tests. When I investigated, the link that I had been sent, even though it was called YMS Scalper, was actually the Beast Super Signal indicator, and it was the version 1.0 of that indicator. Now, version 1.0 is quite an old version, and it had bugs in it, bugs that have been acknowledged by the Beast trading software people, and they rectified it in later versions. But because it had those bugs, I didn't run any tests because they would have been somewhat valueless. The indicator has some repainting issues where the signals move after they've been raised and sometimes disappear completely. So I didn't bother to test it, but I did say that I would come back and show how I wrote the code for it, because even though that indicator is not a great indicator to use, the technique can be applied against other indicators. Also, following that video, a comment was added to the video by the people from Beast Trading Software, also confirming that version 1 had bugs and saying that you should not use it. So they're protecting their brand by making sure that everyone understands. These are the things that I said in the video myself, that you shouldn't use this because it has these bugs, and I did indicate that it had been fixed in later versions. They raised the comment to confirm the same thing, and so just to make sure that I'm being clear here, I'm not only going to write this code for the version 1 that I was sent, and that version 1 was on Metatrader 4 only. I'm also going to update that code to use the latest version of the Beast Super Signal version 4.3 that I'm going to be downloading from the Metatrader market. And then because they also have a Metatrader 5 version on the market, I'm going to convert that same code again to Metatrader 5 for the version 4.3 of the Beast Super Signal. So 3 different sets of code here. I'm beginning with the version 1 because that will cover most of the code, and then I'll simply modify that at each step going forward. And then I have another video coming where I show how I wrote the code for the actual YMS indicator, which I did test, but it's a different type of indicator, and so the code uses a different technique. I intended to make this a single video where I cover the version 1.0 of the Beast Super Signal, and then I update that to the version 4.3 and then convert that code from Metatrader 4 to Metatrader 5. But by the time I finished recording the version 1.0 code, the video is getting a little long. So I'm actually splitting this into 2 parts. I'll be releasing both parts almost at the same time, and there will be a link in the description between them so you can find part 1 and 2. So you can just watch the shorter video. But just remember, in part 2, I'm simply going to be modifying the code that's already written. So if you don't watch part 1, you won't have the base code to begin with part 2. Now, starting with the Beast Super Signal version 1. And remember, this indicator has bugs, and the bugs have been fixed in later versions. I'm showing this because of the programming exercise in case you come across other indicators that use a similar technique. So I've already installed Beast Super Signal, and I've called it Beast Super Signal V1.0 here in my Orchard folder. I have a chart. I'll just right click on that. There are no objects here and there are no indicators. So this is a completely blank chart that I'm going to be using just to see what shows up in this Beast Super Signal. Let's load the Beast Super Signal on. Inputs. Okay, so I know there are a number of inputs. I'm not going to change any of those, but just be aware that they exist, and I'll just say OK. I'm going to, I should have already opened this up, view data window. So now I have the data window open, I have the indicator running, and I can see that I have 2 indicator values here. They're blank there at the moment, but here's an arrow on the chart. If I put my pointer over that arrow, I can see that a value appears in the data window. So these elements in the data window align with these arrows. There's a down arrow. Let's see if I can scroll backwards here. And here's an up arrow, and if I hover over the up arrow, I can see that I have a value in value 1. So that's the first step, is loading the indicator and investigating what I have. If I right click on here now, there is still no objects, nothing shows up in here, just the indicators. So that tells me that these arrows are being drawn as part of an indicator from a buffer, and particularly because I can see values appearing here in the data window when I hover over the candles that have those arrows, I can see that the arrow is actually an indicator buffer of type arrow rather than objects drawn on the screen, and that's significant. So there are no objects showing and I have the indicators appearing here. If I take the trouble to run this indicator through the strategy tester, and I'll show you how to do that, you go to View, Strategy Tester, and then here where it says Expert Advisor, you can change that to Indicator, and you can load in the Beast Super Signal. And it's a good idea to run that in a slow visual mode to one of the points where you know arrows are going to appear. Now, I've already done that, so I'm not going to waste your time showing it. But these arrows appear at the beginning of the candle where the arrow shows. So what they're actually telling me is at the point where this candle opens, an arrow is drawn saying that I should be buying. So I'm effectively buying at the open of this candle. Now, this indicator does have a redraw bug, but we're just going to ignore that for the moment and assume that that's correct. So what I'm looking for is to be able to read the indicator buffers, and because the buffer is blank most of the time, you can see over here it's blank except when I'm over an arrow, I'm going to be looking for points where there is a value compared to points where there is not a value. And as soon as I find a value in one of these two up or down buffers, I know that I need to trade. So I can see that hovering over this candle with the down arrow, I have a value in the second buffer. If I scroll the chart backwards and I hover over this candle with an up arrow, I have a value in the first buffer. And everywhere else, they're both blank. So what I'm looking for is to have one of those two showing a value. The actual values don't matter because those values will align with these arrows, and the arrows you can see are positioned below or above the candles. So the price that's assigned and shows up in the buffer is really just the position where this arrow is being displayed and has nothing to do with the opening price, closing price, open, high or low of this candle, other than it's set to maintain a certain element of spacing from the candle. So all I'm really looking for is a value does exist, and when one does exist, I'm going to enter at the opening of that candle. And for this exercise, I'm just going to set a fixed take profit and stop loss. So I'm not going to do anything special. You may prefer to hold a trade until the opposite arrow occurs. So in the case of this up arrow, for example, you would be entering there and holding the trade all the way to here, which is quite a nice profit. In the case of that down arrow, you'd be entering a trade here and holding it all the way to there. But for today, I'm just, as I said, setting a fixed take profit and stop loss so that I can basically open the trades and then forget about them. Now, with all of that investigation done, let's go on and write the code. So I just open up the Metatrader editor here, and now I'm in the MQL4 editor. I've already created a folder under experts called Orchard, as I usually do, and I've created one under that called Beast SS Expert. So that's where I'm going to be creating all of the experts today. Just right click on that, choose new file, and I'll go through the wizard to create the file. It's an expert advisor. Next. I'm calling this Beast SS Expert V1.0 because this is the version 1 Beast SS Expert. And I'm not going to enter any parameters here. I do all of that in the code. I can finish. So that has created the outline of the expert for me. I'm just going to reformat this a little because I don't like the way these are formatted. So now I have the basic outline. I'll just begin with some inputs. If I click back to the Metatrader, and here are the inputs. Now I'm not going to enter all of these. I'm only going to take the first three, but you'll see from that how to do the rest of these. And the only real difference between the first three and the others, these are integers, and you can tell that because there's no decimal place there. Where these down at stochastic filter and overbought level and so on, they're decimals, and some further down are going to be enums. But I'm just going to show the first three, and you can always add more if you want to. Now those are the only three inputs that I'm going to use for the indicator. I'll just leave all the rest of them at the defaults. In fact, these are the default values, but I'm just showing how you can capture inputs that you then pass to the indicator that you're embedding into this expert. So I've just entered some more inputs, and I just made the font a little bigger. I realized that I hadn't set that for you. So we have the depth, deviation, and backstep at 60, 5, and 3. They're just the default values from the indicator, as I said, and I'm not bothering to enter any more of those. I'll use the rest of the defaults as they are. Standard inputs though, volume, that's going to be the size of the trades I'm going to take. So this will be just taking fixed size trades. Take profit pips and stop loss pips. I said that I would be using a fixed take profit and stop loss. And these values are in pips, so I'll have to convert them back to values later. A magic number, just 23, 23, 23, and a trade comment that I'll attach to each trade. I'm going to be using iCustom to access the indicator, but I'm not just going to call the iCustom with the path to the indicator. I have addressed this in an earlier video. In fact, I'll just paste in the link to that video now. Now this is explained in the video, and I'm not going to go through it all now, but what this will effectively do is load the indicator as a resource, which means that I don't need to rely on it existing in the defined path when this expert is run. It will already be embedded inside this expert. But the other thing you'll see here is that I've indicated the path is indicators / Beast Super Signal V1.0, and the resource statement simply appends or prepends an empty string here. What I'm going to do now, let me just do a refresh there. Now you can see this is where I'm creating the Beast SS Expert V1.0. I'm going to create a new folder. And if I go to the indicators folder here and find I need to show all files. That way I can see the Beast Super Signal V1.0. So that's the indicator that I have. I am going to copy that into this indicators folder. So I'm just going to do that with a control, drag, and drop. Now the reason I've done that, there are two reasons. If you watch the video, I do mention that there's a limit to this path length. I wouldn't have caused a problem with that limit here, but sometimes if you've got multiple embedded folders and very long indicator names, you might strike a problem with the path length for the resource statement. This will mean that my path length is only indicators and a double backslash plus the name of the indicator. So this keeps the path length short. But more importantly than that, if I simply refer to this indicator and for some reason it's a third-party indicator and it gets updated in the future, I want to have control over whether I am using the updated version or the version that I originally built my expert with. And as you'll see later, when we get to the latest version of the Beast Super Signal, they've changed the inputs. So I don't simply want to update my expert with the latest version of this without knowing about it. So by making a copy here, I know that I'm always going to be compiling against that copy, and if I want to update to a later version, I can simply copy that later version in here and make a conscious decision to do that. So this is my technique for making sure that I'm using known versions of indicators. Just shrink that up. And what these statements do, it says this is my definition of the path. The resource, because I have an empty string in front of that, means that it's looking at a relative path compared to the position of this expert. If I had included the backslash here, then it would go back to the indicators folder. And then this hash define, this is actually what will be used inside the iCustom statements later. And I think the next thing I'll do, I have these inputs for take profit and stop loss in pips. I'm going to convert those back to decimal values. So I'm just going to create two global variables for that. Now down to on init, I'm only going to be trading this on a new bar. I showed in the demonstration that the arrow appears at the beginning of a bar, so I don't want to keep looking at the bar after that has happened. If it hasn't been there at the beginning of the bar, then it's not going to occur. And if it does occur, I don't want to keep processing. So once a bar. I have an earlier video also where I show how you can restrict processing to only once per bar. I'll just paste in a link to that as well. So this video will explain how this function works. I won't go into too much detail, but all I'm really saying here is I'm effectively setting IsNewBar just for the first bar. In case you've opened this expert in the middle of a running bar, I don't want to make a trade at that point. So this will stop that trade happening. And so I'll go down to the bottom of the code now and I'll just copy this IsNewBar function into the code here. There we go. This is explained in the other video and the link is here. I won't waste time describing it here. I'll just leave it on the screen for a few seconds and move on. Something else I will do here, I'll just add in a function call. Okay, this is a call to a function. I'll also go and write this in just a moment. This is not important at all to the expert. I put it in here for these demonstrations, and what it will do is simply display in big letters the current symbol on the chart, and I do that just because on the video it makes it much easier for you to see which symbol I'm processing. But it has no effect on the expert at all, but because that will appear there, I've included this statement here, and now I'll go down and show the ShowCurrencyLabel function. I'll also just copy this in rather than spend the time writing it because it's a standard function that I use, so I tend to just keep a copy of these. All I'm doing is creating an object called currency label. I'm putting it on the current chart, chart ID 0. I first delete the object just in case it's already there. If the object is not already there, this statement has no effect. Then I create the object and I set various things. The text is the symbol, and that's how I show the current symbol on the chart. I'm just setting the color, large font size. I'm putting it in the top left corner, 100 points away from the X and the Y corner. So that's all that will do, just display that in big letters, show you which symbol we're processing. So it actually has no impact on the way the expert runs, but because you'll see that on screen, I'm just going to show you that here. And next I want to actually convert these take profit and stop loss pips to doubles. And this PipsToDouble function is also just a standard function that I have. So I'll again go to the bottom of the code. I'll paste that in and explain it. But I'm just passing in the integer value of the take profit pips or the integer value of the stop loss pips. And this will convert it to a double value. So down here in the bottom of the code, let me create a bit more space here. So the PipsToDouble, it has one input, which is, I've called it double pips here. First I get the digits for the current symbol, and that's with the symbol info integer, passing in the arguments of symbol and then symbol underscore digits. And I'm casting that to an integer because this will come back as a long, and I really only want an integer. Then I want to calculate number of points, and that is the number of pips, which were passed in here, multiplied by, and here's a ternary operator. The ternary operator means I have a condition here, And that's the condition. I'm saying if digits are equal to 3 or digits are equal to 5. And the question mark is the if statement effectively in the ternary operator. So if digits are 3 or 5, then the result is 10. Otherwise 1. I'm multiplying that by pips. So if you have something with 3 digits or 5 digits, then I'm going to be multiplying pips by 10. Otherwise I'll be multiplying pips by 1, which effectively is just pips. And then value is just points, which is this value multiplied by the size of a point, which I get from symbol info double, symbol, and symbol underscore point. And then I just return that value. So now I have take profit and stop loss, their global values, so I don't need to worry about them again. They are already set to the size. So down to OnTick, and I'm also going to be calling this IsNewBar. I called it once in the onInit just to make sure that I don't reprocess the bar where you start the expert. But I only want to process once per bar, so I'm just saying there, if this is not a new bar, then return. And now I want to get the values for either the up or the down arrow if they exist. To get the buy signal and the sell signal, that actually should be one, I'm calling a single function that I'm calling signal value, and the two arguments to that are going to be the buffer number and the bar number. So I want to read this for bar number 0, the current bar, and the buy signals come from buffer number 0 and the sell signals come from buffer number 1. Remember, you can see here this is an up arrow and I have a value in the first line in the Beast Super Signal. If I move the arrow, then the value goes away, but here I get a value here in the buffer number 0 if for an up arrow, and if I hover over this down arrow, then you get a value in the second value, which is buffer number 1. So I'm looking for sell signals as values in buffer number 1 and buy signals in buffer number 0. So let's write the signal value function. Scroll up so we have a little bit of space. Add a few blank lines there. So I'm calling iCustom to get the value, and the first two arguments are the symbol and the period, and the third is the path to the indicator. And that's where I defined this indicator Beast SS above. Let me scroll back up and show that. Indicator Beast SS, and because I'm using a resource, this begins with the double colon. So that simply defines the indicator that I'm calling with iCustom. Now I pass the arguments in here. As I said, there are many arguments to that indicator, but I can pass in as few as I like, and for any that I don't pass into this function, it will simply use the defaults from the indicator. So I've only got 3. I'm just going to pass those in here. So these are the 3 values that I actually want to pass into the indicator. I can keep adding more values as long as I have values that the indicator takes, or I can, as I said, leave it at that point. But there are 2 more arguments that must be passed to iCustom. So the last 2 arguments are going to be the buffer number and the bar number. So if I have more inputs that I want to pass to the indicator, I can simply add them at this point after the INP backstep, but I must have the buffer and bar number as the last 2 arguments. Now I've put this signal value into its own function here simply because it makes it easier at some point if I want to actually add values here. In this case, I really only call it from one place, but if I was doing this from multiple places, I want to make sure that I'm always calling it consistently, and this lets me update this one iCustom statement in this single signal value function. It also allows me in one place to very conveniently just check. Typically, if an indicator has no value, as you saw those blanks in the buffers, then it would be returning empty value, but it's also possible to redefine what empty value is inside an indicator. And so it could be redefined as 0 in some cases. So I'm simply going to add one more statement here. So just in case the authors of the indicator have decided to use 0 rather than empty value, I'm just going to say if I received a 0 back, then it's an empty value. And then I just return that value. Just get rid of these blank lines. So now I have a buy signal and a sell signal retrieved from buffers 0 and 1 for bar number 0 when I have a new bar. And the next part here in the OnTick, in fact this is the last part in OnTick, it's quite simple. So if I actually have a value in the buy signal, then it doesn't matter what that value is. Remember, those values are just telling you where the arrow has been positioned. But this is just saying that I need to open a trade because there is now a buy signal. And if I have a buy signal, then I'm going to call a function which I'll write in a moment called OpenTrade, passing in order type buy. Just copy this and duplicate it for the sell. And that takes care of everything. I just need to write this OpenTrade function. This is a good point to mention. In this expert that I'm writing, I'm not handling any kind of errors. I'm not checking that the lot size you're using is valid for the symbol. I'm not checking that you have sufficient funds. I'm not checking the market's open. None of those things. This is just going to push through blindly and assume that everything works. If you want to add those kind of things, then you should add them. But if I build all of that in here, it just makes the video too long. Add some blank space there so it's easier to see. So this is my open trade function. All I'm taking here is the type. I'm going to be opening these trades at whatever the current market value is. So the indicator shows up at the beginning of a bar. There's no guarantee that I'm going to catch it immediately at that price. So I don't want to check the price at the opening of the bar. I simply want to open the trade immediately. So I just set up my variables for the price, the stop loss, and the take profit. So if the type is an order type buy, then buy trades are opened at the ask price. So I'm getting my price from symbol info double, symbol, and symbol underscore ask. Now this is Metatrader 4 because the version 1.0 indicator I have for Beast Super Signal is only Metatrader 4. So there are other ways you can get this, but I like to write symbol info double now simply because the same function works for Metatrader 4 and 5 and it just makes it easier to transfer. You can simply use the ask and the bid variables if you want to. And then I just need to duplicate that on the sell side. And then reverse. So the take profit is price minus take profit and the stop loss is price plus stop loss if I'm on the sell side. And I know that I can only be passing in a buy or a sell in this expert. So if the type is not an order type buy, it must be an order type sell. Now I'm just going to make sure that those are valid prices, stop loss and take profit. I'm getting the number of digits for the symbol. I probably could have captured that at the beginning of the code as a global variable. I forgot about it. I'm not going to fix it now. You can always move that later if you want to. And then I'm just using normalized double to make sure that the price, the stop loss, and the take profit are correctly rounded for the number of digits for this symbol. And then I just need to send that order through. So the order send function returns a ticket number. I'm capturing that here in ticket equals order send. Arguments are the symbol, the type, which was passed in here as the order type, volume from the inputs, price. I'm using 0 for slippage, so I'm just allowing unlimited slippage in this case. Stop loss and take profit, and then the trade comment and magic number. If order send fails, then I'll get a ticket number that is 0 or negative. And so I'm just going to print an error message in this case. I'll wrap that around so it's a little easier to see. And so I'm capturing the error, get last error, in this ERR variable. Then the print format, %s, those are string placeholders and floating point placeholders and an integer placeholder there. So just the symbol, enum to string type, so you can see this string rather than just the number that's associated with type, price, stop loss, take profit, and the error number. Now I think that should be everything. Let me just delete these extra lines and hit the compile. Unsupported file extension. It looks like I've managed to open this without having a .mq4 extension. I don't know how that happened, but I'll just do a file save as. That's better. So that's compiled. Let's just see if I got everything right. We'll run that in the strategy tester. Now I'm not going to run a full test on this. I just want to see if it can pick up at least these two trades. I will start on the 22nd of December. That should pick up this short trade and this long trade if I go past the 23rd. Euro US dollar period H1. I'm not too worried about the spread. I'm running in visual mode, and from December, what did I say, 22 until December 24. If I look at the expert properties and go to the inputs, you can see here are the three inputs that I associated for the indicator. I'm not going to be using them. They just are there now, and I'm not even going to change them here. Then there's the volume, take profit pips, stop loss pips, and magic number and the comment. Now I have the test running. I'm just going to speed it, let it run all the way through to the end. The Metatrader 4 strategy tester doesn't show these arrows from indicators, or doesn't show anything from indicators until the tester stops. That's why you might have seen that these trades were being opened when there were no arrows. You can also see here an issue that I assume is related to the bug that was found in this version 1 of the indicator. The trade has opened here on this candle at 4 o'clock, but the arrow is actually here on the 3 o'clock candle. Even though I'm testing the 4 o'clock candle for a value, it appears that after I've tested for that value and found it right at the beginning of the candle, then the arrow is moving backwards by 1. If I go to the journal, you can even see that the Beast Super Signal Expert has opened a trade at 0400, and even the signal has raised its alert at 0400. So for some reason these arrows are out by 1, and I assume that's just because of the bugs that were fixed in the indicator. But the expert is certainly working. It's picking up the value from this candle when it first opens, and that value is then being moved later. And so now I've finished the code for the version 1.0 Beast Super Signal. Version 4.6 of Beast Super Signal is a little different, and so I have the second part video coming up, and I will show you how to modify the code that we've just written to the code that works for the new indicator, and also go through the steps of reviewing that indicator to see what values we want to read from it. There'll be a link in the description of this video where you can find part 2, and that will be coming out almost at the same time as this video.